A violent explosion tears through reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The blast rips apart the reactor building, sending radioactive debris into the night sky. In seconds, one of the worst nuclear disasters in human history has begun. The date is April 26, 1986. The time is 1:23 in the morning. At the Chernobyl disaster, a late-night safety experiment at a Soviet nuclear power station spirals out of control. The facility sits near the city of Pripyat in Soviet Ukraine. At the time, Pripyat is home to nearly 50,000 residents, many of them workers at the power plant. Inside the control room of reactor number 4, engineers monitor rows of analog gauges and control panels. The operators are conducting a safety test meant to determine whether turbines can power emergency cooling systems during a blackout. The test is overseen by Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov as operators begin adjusting the reactor's power levels. The reactor design used at Chernobyl is known as an RBMK reactor, a system that can become unstable at low power levels. To continue the test, operators withdraw control rods that normally regulate the nuclear reaction. Power inside the reactor begins rising unpredictably. Inside the control room, alarms begin sounding as pressure continues to build. Reactor pressure begins climbing rapidly beyond safe limits. Operators initiate an emergency shutdown to stop the nuclear reaction. Due to a design flaw, the control rods briefly increase the reaction instead of stopping it. Within seconds, reactor power surges to extreme levels. Steam pressure inside the reactor builds rapidly. At 1:23 a.m., a powerful steam explosion tears through the reactor. A second explosion scatters radioactive material across the power plant. After the explosion, the reactor building is torn open. The massive concrete lid that once sealed the reactor core has been blown apart, exposing the interior of reactor number 4 to the open air. Within minutes, emergency calls bring firefighters and plant personnel rushing to the scene. Fire engines arrive at the power plant as responders begin climbing onto the damaged reactor buildings, attempting to extinguish fires spreading across the complex. The explosion has released enormous amounts of radiation. The exposed reactor core and scattered graphite blocks are emitting lethal levels of radioactive energy. Most of the first responders have little protective equipment and no understanding of the radiation they are being exposed to. Despite the danger, the firefighters continue working through the night, attempting to prevent the fires from spreading to other reactor units at the power plant. Their actions help prevent an even larger catastrophe. But many of the men who fought the fires that night receive dangerous and often fatal doses of radiation. As the fires continue to burn at the reactor site, radioactive material begins rising high into the atmosphere. The explosion has released enormous quantities of radioactive particles. During the first hours after the explosion, much of the radioactive plume moves north and west across the Soviet Union. Within days, the radioactive cloud spreads far beyond the immediate region. Radiation is detected in Belarus, Russia, and large parts of Eastern Europe. Eventually, the contamination reaches countries thousands of miles away. In Sweden, radiation alarms at a nuclear power station begin sounding when workers arrive for their shifts. At first, officials suspect a problem inside their own plant. But further investigation reveals the source is coming from outside the country. Scientists trace the radioactive particles back across Europe to a single location: the damaged reactor at the site of the Chernobyl disaster. The spread of contamination forces governments across Europe to begin monitoring food supplies, farmland, and drinking water. In some regions, milk and crops are temporarily removed from production due to radioactive fallout. Closer to the disaster site, the consequences are even more severe. Large areas of land in Ukraine and Belarus become heavily contaminated. Entire towns and villages must eventually be evacuated and abandoned. The nearby city of Pripyat, once home to tens of thousands of residents, is emptied and left frozen in time. What began as a single reactor accident in the early hours of April 26th would soon become one of the most far-reaching environmental disasters in modern history.